Glenn is a tasteless bastard, but a powerful mage who gets stuck as a depressed substitute teacher. When he was younger, he wanted to be a mage of justice, causing him to be one of the youngest students to join the Imperial Mage Corps. During his time there, the princess was kidnapped by an evil organization, so the queen begged him to protect her, even if it meant she would never see her daughter again. Glenn carried out his orders seamlessly, but as he continued to go on missions, he soon realized he was nothing more than a glorified murderer and started to hate magic. After losing someone he held dear, he quit to become a freeloader and sponge off the most powerful mage in the world, Celica. Celica got tired of this deadbeat smell, so she insisted he become a substitute teacher so he wouldn't waste away. Though he tried to decline, she threatened to put an extra large hole in him if he didn't agree. And that's how he got roped into this job. On his first day, both Celica and the teachers felt he was scum for being so late to a prestigious academy, but it turned out he was outside annoying two girls, Rumia and Sistine, who are also his students. When he finally arrived at the class, he declared it was a self-study class and took a nap. But when Sistine insisted he does his damn job, the bell rang and he escaped. Meanwhile, Hallie, the teacher with a stick up his ass, nags the principal about Glenn not having any qualifications or experience as a teacher, but the principal assured him that Glenn was highly recommended by Professor Celica. The next day, Glenn was back to ruin everyone's day, so Sistine threatened to have her father fire him if he didn't act right. However, Glenn saw this as salvation and begged her to get it done, angering her to challenge him to a duel. Glenn suddenly got serious and accepted her challenge, and everyone thought he was truly classless to duel his student. Because of this, he decided to make the rules so that they can only use Shock Bolt, meaning the better chanter would win. However, when the match began, Sistine electrocuted him to no end because it turned out he wasn't pretending to be an idiot. Regardless, the bastard returned to teaching his class with zero effort, so Sistine called him out on not appreciating how great magic is. This seems to have hit a nerve because Glenn tells her that the only thing magic is really useful for is ending someone's life, which saddens her. Later, Rumia approaches Glenn and calls bullshit on him not caring about magic, so he asks her why they're all so excited by it anyway. Rumia tells him about her dream of repaying her debt to a man who rescued her from some evil mages, which Glenn immediately recognizes. Thanks to her preachy speech, Glenn apologizes to the class and finally starts doing some real teaching. His approach was completely unconventional, and soon students from other classes started joining in to learn. One day, Glenn was late to school again when he ran into minions of the evil group Divine Wisdom who attacked him. Back at the school, the men led Remia away because she's the princess, while Sistine gets tied up and is about to be scarred by an ugly man. Glenn shows up to help Sistine and tells him to get his useless self to safety, but when the evil mage tries to attack, his magic doesn't work. Glenn reveals that his own original spell, Fool's World, allowed him to seal any magic in a given area, including his own, but that only meant that he could focus on punching the indecency out of the man. However, the battle is not over yet as the man summons skeleton warriors that Glenn is unable to punch through, so Sistine uses her magic to give him a boost so he can damage them. The skeleton men far outnumber them, so Glenn instructs Sistine to use a wind spell to hold them back while he casts a much stronger spell called Extinction Ray to finish them off. The spell gives him mana deficiency, which is bad news as yet another henchman shows up. Glenn whispers something to Sistine, then pushes her to safety while he takes on the mage alone. He gets overwhelmed and stabbed with several swords, but Sistine manages to sneak up behind and cast a spell to stall the mage, giving Glenn an opening to take the man out for good. Glenn faints from the blood loss, but Sistine uses her magic to heal him enough for him to go find Rumia. When he does, he sees she's being held hostage by another teacher who's acting as a human bomb, while Rumia is on a timed magic circle that will send her to the Divine Wisdom's evil lair. Glenn immediately uses his blood to overwrite the magic circles and is aided by Rumia, who restores his energy to finish the job, after he punches the blondie and saves the day. Meanwhile, the queen has been invited to the school's magic competition, which means she gets to see her daughter again, though she imagines Rumia must hate her for giving her up. Back at the school, Glenn hears about the bonus for winning the magic competition and makes a bet with Hallie that his class will win. The day finally arrives and the queen's handmaiden gives her a new locket to wear so no one would know Rumia is her daughter. The competition begins and Glenn's class begins to kick ass, including Rumia, who beats out this Giga Chad. After watching her, the queen decides to damn the consequences and see her daughter. Later, she meets with Glenn and Rumia, but when she tries to tell Rumia how she feels, Rumia pretends she doesn't know who she's talking about and runs off, leaving the queen devastated. The queen asks Glenn to continue to protect her no matter what, and he agrees. When she tries to return, she's stopped by the Imperial Guard, who suddenly needs to restrain her. Later, Glenn finds Rumia beating herself up over the mess with her mom, so he tells her about the queen's true feelings and encourages her to try again. However, before she can leave, the Imperial Guard appears and demands to execute Rumia on the queen's orders. Glenn refuses to accept this and carries her away, then calls Celia to ask what's going on. Celia says she can't do or say anything, and he's the only one who can break up the situation. While Glenn wonders what's going on, Riel and Albert, his former colleagues from the Imperial Mage Corps, show up and tell him they've been investigating some shady dealings within the Imperial Guard. After exchanging information, they come up with a plan. So Albert and Riel go to cheer the students on for the rest of the competition, while Glenn takes Rumia far away from the school. They eventually get cornered by the Divine Wisdom group and discover that the Queen's handmaiden is working with the group. Back at the school, Glenn's class wins, and when Albert and Riel step forward to receive the award, they suddenly change into Glenn and Rumia. Glenn figures out what's been going on and breaks the Queen's necklace, which was under a curse to end her life, unless she ended Rumia's. After Rumia apologizes and hugs her mom briefly, then they go back to acting like strangers. Meanwhile, Albert and Riel try to interrogate the handmaiden, and she mentions something about getting her hands on the Akashic records before making her escape. The next day, Glenn tells the girls Riel will be joining their class to act as a secret bodyguard for Rumia, but Riel turns out to be socially awkward and unable to function as a normal human being, so the girls take her under their wing. Later, they head on to a field trip and Albert shows up in disguise, warning him that Riel can be dangerous. They head to the beach and Riel really manages to bond with the girls and is happy to have friends for the first time. However, that night she confronts Glenn about quitting the Corps and leaving her without any purpose in life. Glenn tries to remind her about her brother, but she suddenly decides that it's the girls and all of the students who took him away from her and decides that she hates them all. The next day, Riel refuses to talk to the girls while the class heads out to a research facility that deals with life itself. Sistine remembers hearing about an old project called Revive Life to revive the dead, but Glenn explains that it was more like making a copy of someone, but it was shut down because too many people had to die in the process. The head researcher adds that only someone with origin magic would be able to finish the project anyway, which is currently impossible. That night, Riel is approached by a man who claims to be her brother, so she decides to make him her life's purpose instead, and he asks her to capture Rumia for him. Glenn interrupts and tries to talk some sense into her, but Riel plunges her sword into him and leaves to get Rumia. When Sistine goes to the room, she finds Riel standing over Rumia, but she's too scared to defend her. So Riel escapes with Rumia. Just then, Albert drags Glenn in and asks for Sistine's help in reviving him. So he makes preparations for a spell while she gives him CPR. When Glenn wakes up, Albert tells him his intel linking the director of the research facility with the Divine Wisdom group, so they head out to rescue Rumia using a tracker Albert placed on the handmaid. The director sends all kind of chimeras at them to slow them down, but when none of them works, he transforms himself and heads out to meet them. Albert says he'll take care of it and makes an opening, so Glenn runs to the control to face Riel and her brother. There he tells Riel the truth about how her real brother died while trying to put an end to the original project, Revive Life, which happens to be Riel herself. Now that Riel realizes she's just a copy, her fake brother calls her trash and releases 3 more versions of her to attack Glenn and take her out too. When Glenn protects her, he encourages her to live for something she holds dear, so she steals her resolve and takes out the inferior copies. After, Glenn takes out the last fake standing and rescues Rumia. Everything goes back to normal at the academy, except for the arrival of the substitute teacher called Leos. He calls himself Sistine's fiancé. Sistine asks what the heck he's on about, so they take a walk and reminds him of her childhood promise. He officially asks her to marry him, but she refuses, saying she has a dream to surpass her grandfather and unravel the secret of the Sky Castle. Leos belittles her dreams and says she would be wasting her life, so Glenn interrupts to say that's bullshit. Sistine uses this as the perfect opportunity to worm her way out and say that she can't marry him because Glenn is actually her real fiancé. Though shocked, Glenn goes with it and even challenges Leos to a class duel to settle the matter. After, Leos meets with a shady figure and tells him the operation is going according to plan. Later, the duel takes place, and Holly calls it a draw between both classes, but neither Leos nor Glenn are satisfied and agree on an individual duel instead. Meanwhile, the Imperial Mage Corps members find a couple of dead bodies, which means someone's been using Angel's Dust again. Later, Sistine confronts Glenn about why he's so invested in the duels, so he tells her the story of his past and confesses he may be trying to atone for his friend's death by protecting her. At that moment, Leos appears and taunts him about being a failure in the Mage Corps. This ticks Glenn off and he decides to settle things right then and there. But Leos uses a legendary technique called two pals, and Glenn is powerful against them. Leos tells Glenn to get his shit together by their next duel, so Glenn walks off sadly. When he leaves, Leos blackmails Sistine by threatening to harm Rumia and expose Riel. After that, Glenn disappears and seemingly abandoned the academy, while Sistine was set to marry that slimeball in a week. On the day of the wedding, Sistine decides that she has to protect her friends and goes along with the ceremony, but Glenn shows up at the very last second and steals Sistine away, leaving Riel to protect Rumia. Sistine cries and asks Glenn where he's been, so he explains that he has to prepare for the upcoming battle. Suddenly, zombie citizens start flooding the alleyway and the church, so Glenn starts taking them out, shocking Sistine, who's never seen this side of him. She even tells him not to touch her, which he expected. Then Leo shows up for the main act. Glenn realizes that the events have happened before with his friend and calls Justice out for pretending to be Leo. Justice reveals himself and says Leo is long dead. Then he says his goal is to obtain the Akashic records, but he has to get rid of Glenn before that. He releases his two pals again, but this time Glenn and Sistine work together to defeat them. Justice pulls out the boss Tupal, so Sistine uses all the mana she has to fire off an advanced spell, while Glenn finishes the job. However, when Glenn rushes to her side due to her mana depletion, Justice sneaks away. Glenn returns to teach the kids, but Justice remains on the loose, along with that sneaky little handmaid. Comment, "That's suspicious," if you think Glenn might have a thing for Sistine. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.